All right, what up, YouTubes? So I recently switched over from Canon to Sony mirrorless cameras. I've been shooting freelance for about 5 years, and the entire time I've been using Canon SLRs. I started on a Canon T3i. I've shot everything from the Canon SL1 up to the Canon 5D Mark III. Never shot the 5D Mark IV because that came out recently, obviously. So I recently switched over to the Sony A7R Mark II mirrorless camera, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that you're gonna miss if you leave Canon for Sony. So the first thing that I noticed when first handling the A7R Mark II was the big difference in ergonomics. This is something that a lot of people brag about with the Sony mirrorless systems, that the camera's smaller, it travels a little bit better, and that is true. I've traveled with this camera already, I've done some gigs with it, and it does pack a lot lighter and a lot better. However, some of the ergonomics are compromised with that. I have pretty big hands, and so I actually wasn't looking forward to the smaller camera, and this is something that I was worried about, and it came true. The grip on the A7R Mark II is a little bit more shallow than what you're probably used to using on, say, a Canon 6D or a Canon 5D Mark III. And I really miss the bigger, chunkier grips. I wish this A7R Mark II had a little bit more meat on the grip. It'd feel a lot more satisfying to hold and a little bit more substantial in your hand. Also with that are the buttons. The buttons on the A7R Mark II and the A7S are very clicky. They feel almost like a point and shoot. They're small, so when you're shooting and you're out in the field, it's easy to accidentally press the wrong button because they're all clustered together so closely, and they're also small, so it's hard to differentiate which button does what. I've done a few gigs with this camera already, and I've noticed that I do hit some buttons by accident. And conversely, on the Canon 6D that I used to shoot primarily and the 5D Mark III that I rented out a lot for gigs, I didn't really find this to be a problem. Also on the A7R Mark II, another problem is how you select your focus points. That was something that I was very used to doing with my Canon systems, was using the joystick and the wheel to pick the right focus point to focus on an eye, or to focus on a particular person in the scene, or an object in the scene. On this A7R II, it's a little bit more cumbersome. You have to click the wheel a few times, and then you can change the size of the focus point by mistake. So it's not as intuitive as the system that Canon has set up on their cameras. And by extension of the annoying focus point system on the A7R Mark II and the Sony A7S, the menu system on the Sony cameras is a little bit confusing. They have a lot of different functions spread out in random pages. On the Canon system, it's very intuitive. I just wish Sony would get some better software engineers to design the OS of their cameras, because on the Canon side, it's very intuitive and easy to use and almost set up for anybody to pick up one of their cameras and start using it really fast. The optical viewfinders on the Canon SLRs, I think I took them for granted. I really was looking forward to the EVF that I get on the mirrorless system, and it is nice. It's got a little bit of lag by comparison to an optical viewfinder, obviously, but it's still fun to use and it's still really accurate. There are times where I wish that I just could see right through the lens, like when it's really dark or when there's a lot of action happening in the scene. And when you're shooting with this camera in a little bit more of a faster setting, when you're shooting dance or sports, or even street photography where there's a lot of people moving in your scene, you're gonna miss the optical viewfinder, and you're not gonna like the way the A7R Mark II displays each image you take for a couple seconds. That took a lot of getting used to, and I still am not totally used to that. It throws off your flow, and I wish that there was an option to switch over to an optical viewfinder at least part of the time that I'm using my A7R Mark II. Another small annoyance that I have with the A7R Mark II and the A7S II are the way you connect your camera strap to them. They have like these little keychain loops that are very reminiscent of the older SLRs, and they have like a little loop here that it takes just a thin part of your camera strap, which isn't a big deal, but when you're recording video and you're hand holding the camera, it tends to rattle and shake a little bit. So that is something that I hope they change in the future. Something else you're gonna miss if you're leaving the Canon system for Sony is the lenses. Canon has a lot of great lenses, and the A7 series is getting more native lenses, and there are a lot of adapters that you can use to adapt basically any lens in the market. However, to take full advantage of the autofocus system, which is really great on this camera, you are going to need Sony native lenses, and there aren't a lot right now. They're coming out fast, but I just wish that they would come out a little bit faster, and they would come out in some of the focal ranges that I prefer to use. One other thing that I would say to keep a heads up for if you're switching from an SLR to a Sony mirrorless system is when you're taking off and putting on different lenses, just be aware of how close your sensor is to the outside of the camera and how much dust and dirt it can pick up as a consequence of that. That took some getting used to. I was always very paranoid of getting my SLRs dirty on the inside, and so I'm a lot more paranoid with this camera of getting any sort of dust or sand on the inside of the camera. So outside of those minor points of criticism and small annoyances, this camera has been great. I've shot several gigs with it already, some involving motion, some portrait shoots, some behind the scenes shoots. Specifically on that behind the scenes shoot, I used the silent shutter mode, and it was really impressive. It even took some getting used to hitting the shutter button and not hearing any feedback from the camera, but it gave me a beautiful large resolution file on the 42 megapixel sensor, and it was really nice. I haven't found a lot of use for the in-body IS. I know for video shooters it's probably more practical. I haven't done a lot of handheld video shooting with this camera. I've done a lot of still shooting, and in those scenarios I didn't see a huge benefit, and it does take away a little bit from your battery life, so I leave it off most of the time. I wish that there were a couple more lenses that I could use on the Sony system. The 28-70 that they ship as a kit with the A7 series cameras is basically unusable in my opinion for certain landscape shots. I tested it in. It's great for video, especially even in the 4K crop mode. It gives you really sharp video, but for stills on a 42 megapixel sensor that's in the A7R Mark II, I believe that it's basically unusable. I shot it at the f8 range to get the sharpest possible image, and still I wasn't satisfied with the amount of detail that I saw in the shots. So there are a couple of things that I do miss about the Canon system. One of the things I didn't mention was the Canon colors. A lot of people talk about the Canon colors. They are great. I think in some cases they saturate a little bit too much in portraits if you're shooting somebody with a lot of red in their skin. But when you're shooting people with neutral skin tones, the Canon colors are really nice. I do miss that a little bit, but with a little bit of editing in post, you're going to be able to get the same out of your Sony cameras. So hopefully that helped convince some people out there if they're switching from Canon to Sony and whether it's still worth it in 2017. If you have any questions, I don't really have a big channel, so you can ask me anything in the comments and I'll probably get back to you right away. So thanks for watching. See you later. If you liked the video, give it a like. If not, you didn't like it. So later.